Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Susie and today we're making whole wheat sandwich bread. This recipe is very simple and easy to follow, and the results are whole wheat bread that nothing at the store compares to. So if you want to see how you can make your own whole wheat bread at home, go ahead and keep on watching. I'm going to start out with measuring and combining the dry ingredients. Bread flour and some whole wheat flour, wheat germ, yeast. I always start by measuring the yeast first instead of the salt so I don't contaminate the yeast jar with salt, because salt can kill yeast. I'm also going to keep the yeast separated from the salt until I'm ready to start baking. For the wet ingredients, I have milk, whole milk, and this should be at room temperature. But this is just a little bit higher. It's at 76.3 degrees. I'm going to add some water, which is at 71, so at room temperature. Melted butter, and I'm going to add honey. My honey was all coagulated, so I put it in some hot water to let it melt and soften up. Going to give everything a good mix. I'm going to go ahead and mix my dry ingredients together. I'm going to add in my wet ingredients. This is what my dough is looking like. The dough is done kneading, and as usual I use my stand mixer. I would be cautious kneading this dough by hand just because it was a little bit sticky and wet, so you might need to add a little bit more flour just to keep the dough manageable. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer the dough onto my countertop. So what I've been doing lately is, instead of adding flour to the surface, I've been adding a little bit of oil just to help, especially with very sticky doughs, just to help with managing and handling the dough. Looks like I apply a little bit too much. I'm going to use the excess to grease the bowl I'm going to use to proof the dough. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and transfer the dough onto my grease countertop. Again, you can use flour for this. I don't know, it's just something I started doing. I don't know if I'm, changing the chemistry of the dough, but I like my dough to be as sticky as it needs to be, and I use oil. I feel like when you use too much flour, like, you just don't know where to stop. You keep adding, and your dough might end up being dense. So that's what I've been doing. So I'm just going to go ahead and knead the dough by hand. And what you're looking for is, you just want a smooth surface. I noticed that you can't really get that when you knead the dough with the stand mixer. So once you're satisfied with the dough, go ahead and form it into a ball, and it should be a nice taut ball, and the surface should be very smooth. I don't know how easy it is to see with the wheat flour, but you should have a nice taut ball, smooth, and the dough should feel very nice in your hands. And by nice, I mean it's not too soft, it's not too dense. It just, like, once you push into it, it like follows your instruction. It's not too hard to deal with. So I'm going to go ahead and put it into my prepped bowl. I always like to tap my dough. Cover the dough with plastic wrap or use a cloth and let it sit for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, or until the dough has doubled in size. You can also grease the plastic wrap just to make sure that if the dough touches it, it doesn't stick onto it. But I think I'll be fine because the bowl I have is tall enough. I'll see you guys very soon. All right, so at this point, your dough should have risen beautifully, about double its size. So it's Sunday, I was chilling, so I did let my dough rise for a little bit over 2 hours, but that should be fine. Typically, you want to avoid that because if you overproof your dough, the flavor might become stale, so just keep that in mind. going to go ahead and remove the plastic wrap. I'm going to punch the dough down and transfer onto my surface. And what we want to do now is we want to press the dough into a 8 by 6 rectangle, just like that. And then we're going to tightly roll the dough. So it's very important that you tightly roll it because you don't want to have any gaps for air to escape. So just gently roll the dough, make sure it's nice and tight. And then we're going to pinch the seam to form a nice tight seal. So my dough is a little bit too long. So right now I'm just like trying to just squish it in just a little bit. So we have about 8 inches. So I'm using an 8.5 by 4.5 inch pan. Going to grease it. That way, once we bake the bread, it can easily slip out of the pan. And we're going to transfer our dough seam side down into the pan. Just like that. Make sure it sits comfortable. I usually like it to be a little bit more even than that, but we're just gonna let it sit like that. If you can do a better job, yay to you. So I'm going to grease plastic wrap and I'm going to cover my dough. And now we're going to let it proof for about 30 minutes to an hour. And what we're looking for is we want the dough to rise 1 inch above the lip of the pan. My dough has been proofing for a little bit over an hour, and I was just watching to make sure that the lip or the bread rose to about 1 inch above the lip. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the plastic wrap. And another thing, before we bake, about 15 minutes before you bake, go ahead and preheat your oven to 350 degrees F and place your oven rack in the lower middle position. My dough rose beautifully. As you can see, one side is just a little bit taller than the other side, but that is just fine. You don't want to overproof your dough because if you overproof it, it will have too much air and it might collapse in the oven. One last thing before we bake, we're going to spritz the loaf with some water. And that's just going to help with the color as it bakes. If you don't have a spraying bottle, I did this yesterday, go ahead and just brush it on with a pastry brush with some water, and that should give you the same results. Going to go ahead and pop this in the oven. Going to bake it for about 35 to 40 minutes, and we're going to rotate it halfway through baking just to make sure that the loaf bakes evenly in the oven. All right, the bread has fully cooled down, and now we're going to slice into it and see what it looks like inside. That looks amazing. Texture is just beautiful. I really like the dark brown the spritz of water gave it. Let's go ahead and cut into it. That is really good bread. The flavor is excellent and the texture. This is why I like to make my own bread. I don't think there's any store-bought bread that can compare to this. Delicious.